right, so Justin and Tobin had asked about talking a little bit about the work that I've been doing here at MSU around supporting research in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. So I put together a brief bit. We'll take some time here, and then I think hopefully discussion and questions. So I may fly through a few of these things. I don't have a link up for this yet because I need to stick it up on my website, but I'll provide a link for all these slides and other things afterward. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of me. So my current work is Assistant Dean for Academic and Research Technology here at MSU College of Arts and Letters. I'm also the co-director of a center that focuses on digital learning, EDLI, and associate director of a center called Mesh Research, which focuses on futures of digital scholarly publishing, and faculty member in experience architecture and digital humanities here at MSU. So I get around a little bit on all of these things they've developed over time, but there are ways that I keep tabs on what's actually happening with the research support work that I'm doing, so that I'm actually experiencing the fruits of my own labor, and not just having to learn about it secondhand. I come from a background of teaching, and so I always say with educational technology work, you have to teach or you don't understand how to do that. And I feel like that really works with research tech support as well. When I'm facing the same issues and problems that my colleagues are, it helps me to really troubleshoot that a lot better. So two main things to kind of talk about is what are some of the particular trends and challenges with supporting this research that I'm seeing, and then what are we doing here at MSU to support it? And I want to note that the focus today is on the non-computational type work in this area. So some of us that are working already with high performance computing centers and then on various work are kind of paving the way for a lot of the rest of our colleagues here. And it's probably similar, I would imagine, on your campuses. So this is kind of my perspective and experience with a lot of that. So starting out with where I will finish slide-wise is I like to situate it with these. This is actually kind of a compounded quote from a mentor of mine and someone that I read a lot of. But collaboration is hard and building things takes slow, hard work. But the outcomes of that long-term engagement are worth it in terms of relationship building, cultures of transparency and openness, and promoting institutionalist thinking. So I'll come back to that at the end. But so just to give a little bit of sense of kind of some work, I just went through my list of consultations and things I've worked on with people recently. And, you know, to give a sense of a lot of our work that I'm seeing that we're focusing on these days are lots of work with open source platforms and frameworks, lots of website work, whether those things are interactive, virtual work, whether they're interacting with physical things around, you know, NFC or beacons, geolocation. A lot of that is with our work. There's a lot of work in the humanities right now around extended reality, around 360 video, movement capture. And those are some of the kind of higher end things. So not a lot of the faculty are doing that, but the people that are diving in are diving deeply. We're seeing a lot of prototyping for devices and spaces around things, and then some application development that we're supporting. And I would say it didn't even make it onto my bullet list, right? Yeah, I said I wasn't going to talk about it, but that's how small the work in computational humanities is happening around here that I'm supporting, because it is actually, if someone is moving in that direction, they're going to ICER or other resources on campus, and they're usually individuals and not broader groups at this point. So the other piece here is our work often happens in, for, and with the public in ways that when I started working with more scientists on campus, I started working with NSF grants and learning about broader impacts components of those. I realized immediately that's what we do all the time in our humanities work. And so situating it in that way changes the way that we approach a lot of the stuff. We're not often looking for storage of data sets or storage of other sorts of findings that aren't intended for public consumption or often created with the public. So one of my archaeology colleagues has always told me that he always says, I really don't care about the security of my data because I really hope that someone cares enough about it that they want to steal it, because then I would just be overjoyed that someone cared about the work that I do. And so there's that sort of thing that pervades a lot of the work too, of wanting people to really care about these things that a lot of folks deeply care about and want to make public. So some of the challenges that we're facing, I think we see a lot of what I'll characterize as lack of planning for long-term storage or hosting. But that's often partially because we don't have resources other than some resources on campus that are helping people think through this work. So people are often thinking about creating things. They're sticking a website up, they're putting data somewhere, they're not talking it through with folks. And so that's been a challenge that we've been trying to address a lot more. Because Justin's here, I can note he's been doing a lot on campus around better information out there for our faculty about where to store and why to store things. Also, our technical skill sets are highly varied, and they're really undercutting our ability to better support work within our small groups without trying to reach out more on campus. And I'll talk a little bit about that as part of the solutions that we started to find. But we have a lot of demand at lower level skill sets. So I might use something like a Mecca, which is a open source platform that we use. And there's so much demand at lower levels of usage that those of us with mid-level or high-level skill sets can't train others and level them up. And so we end up with this huge chunk of people at a lower level of technical skill and very few people at the higher levels. Less agreement on frameworks, platforms, etc. So, a lot of places, computational biology or other places like that, you have certain sets of frameworks, programming languages, etc., where they're agreed upon and kind of standard. We have a lot less of that. I was talking with a colleague on campus who said, oh yeah, you guys are kind of in this massive quilt of people are trying different things and seeing pros and cons and benefits. And then eventually you'll start seeing that shake out to a few different things. But right now it can be overwhelming at times. So we often are having people show up talking with us about something that at times my staff are looking up themselves to find out, what is this thing? Why are they using it? Couple of other challenges. Attention can be really hard to get from resource providers for us, and the budgets are lower. So part of it is telling the stories and seeing it. It's less splashy to talk about an archaeological dig site than it may be to talk about a super glider or something like that. But just simply put, with the budgets being lower, NSF or NIH, I think is $50 billion or something like $51 billion in budget this year, and the combined National Endowment for the Humanities and National Endowment for the Arts is $425 million. So we're competing for a lot less funding. And so when we look at our ability to buy into resources, that's been quite challenging. And then just kind of awareness of resources is sometimes limited and the support is not contextualized for our work. And so We've talked a lot about, okay, there are intro to Python, let's say, offered on campus. And we have a lot of faculty that aren't even sure why they would use Python or what it is, much less go to an intro course on it. And so we've been working now, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but working to get that to a better space. So these kind of broad trends of support that I'm seeing for support that we're working on are just broadly developing these communities practice, opening up collaborations, collectively advocating for things, and really creating that more of a sense of transparency around our work and practice. Wow, this slide got mucked around. So let's ignore the top two bullets that somehow made it in here and focus on the bottom part here. So working with broader campus partners has been one of the ways that I'm working to solve this, and working specifically in these 4 areas. So collaborative visioning is like, how are we both working toward this shared understanding of what resources and needs there are? So I mentioned the Python piece a minute ago. You know, we had a new research support consultant start on campus this past spring, and when they met with some of my digital humanities colleagues the first time, and my colleagues said, hey, look, you know, we have faculty that don't even know why and how to start this. Immediately, they started constructing this shared understanding and vision around, oh, we need to create workshops and resources that contextualize this work in the humanities before we start offering people opportunities for introductory workshops. Shared hiring has been another way that we've leveraged support. Justin has been a member of several of our search committees, and we've collaboratively hired people with central IT around areas like access management, for example, where we need someone. We've written money into a grant for someone, but we don't need a full-time access management person. And that's really that act of doing that has then created a much broader collaboration where we're able to start to trade time commitments and other things with those other collaborating units. Compromise is something really key, operating with the understanding that rarely we're going to get everything that we want, and going into it with both parties, thinking around that. And then the last is collective advocacy. So how we're using our common vision to advocate for needs. So when we have that sort of collaborative vision and we're working in this more understanding-based system, we're able to start to then collectively advocate for the areas that do have need, rather than each unit or each group advocating for their own resources in singularity. And so one of the things that we've stood up on campus that is I think a really good example of that is the Consortium for Digital Scholarship and Practice. And so what this does is allows us to network the people and research clusters and centers in the arts, humanities, and social sciences with one another to more collaboratively offer programming to help expand the knowledge and capacity of the network. So it gets at some of that stuff I talked about challenge-wise. It engages not only these research centers and clusters within the academic units, but engages people like Justin in IT or others in the library. And it's giving us then the ability to offer opportunities to develop and support new networks and connections. So we have new research clusters that are facilitated through that by connecting people with each other, with resources, and then turning that into advocacy for further support resources. So you know, working with a group that might have a better ability to provide a set of programming consultants or application developers, then it would make sense hiring additional ones within an academic unit. So I will just end as I began, of thinking back again, though, about this collaboration is hard, and it takes slow and hard work to build things. And this is work that I was just talking with a colleague about this morning, and she reminded me that her first week on campus, I had connected her in with, we used to have a cyber infrastructure days conference, one-day conference on campus about 10 years ago. And she reminded me that her first week on campus, I had plugged her into that event. And so she said, I don't know how you were involved in that event, but apparently you were involved enough in that event that you plugged me into that event my first week on the job. And that was 10 years ago. And so that really hit home as I was reviewing the slides earlier, because it's been a long build of trying to create these relationships and work toward this. So I just encourage everyone to keep thinking that way, keep plugging along, because you'll be able to make it all work over time. So are we passing off, Justin, and then Q&A later? Yes.
Yeah, I think that will, that seems to work better. I think when we can use the chat, post your questions there. We also have a chat in the notes. And with that, thank you, Scott. I like that quote. That does hit home. And with that, I'll pass on to Moira and Derek. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And thanks, Scott. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us today. As Tobin mentioned, I'm Moira Downey. I'm the research facilitator with the Research Facilitation Service at NC State. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the RFS and our approach to support for research, computing, and data among the humanities and social sciences. And then Derek, our research integrations consultant, is going to pick up and offer his perspective on moving from a more university IT, traditional university IT position to one situated in the libraries. And then he's going to present a particular case study of supporting the social sciences at his previous institution. Okay, Derek, you can move us. So first, a little bit of context and background about NC State. Derek, next slide. Yeah, we're an R1 university located in Raleigh, North Carolina. We've got nearly 38,000 students, 2,500 faculty, and more than 7,000 staff distributed across 12 colleges representing all major academic fields. For fiscal year 2023, we saw more than $460 million in new sponsored research awards and $546 million in annual research expenditures. Next slide. Relevant to our conversation today, if we take a quick look at the average reported award dollars for the period of 2019 to 2023, our College of Humanities and Social Sciences, which we lovingly refer to as CHAS, and that's what I'm going to call it going forward today, appears on the lower end with just about $2 million reported for that period. To the extent that research dollars awarded is kind of a proxy for these things, right? The majority of our research energy and funding is concentrated in STEM fields. So the College of Engineering, the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and the College of Sciences are our top award recipients. And this isn't surprising, right? Because I think it represents a number of trends in higher ed and research funding more broadly, you know, that Scott just touched on. Agencies that are dedicated to funding the arts, humanities, and social sciences are just operating with much smaller pools, right? Much smaller budgets. And I think it's a phenomenon that's maybe amplified at NC State, which has the largest engineering program, for example, in the state, and a reputation among the 17 schools of the UNC system as being kind of the STEM campus. Next slide. With the caveat that these data points are really only lightly related. If we take a look at the total undergraduate enrollment by college for the most recent year I could find, which was unfortunately 2020, I think it's actually kind of interesting that CHAS is near the top, you know, 3,775 students, or about 15% of the total undergraduate enrollment for 2020. We all know instruction and research are not the same thing, but I like to argue that the line between the two isn't really as bright as we often make it out to be. And it's certainly not the case that the humanities and the social sciences at NC State is some kind of ghost town, right? And I think that gap between the number of folks who are expressing interest in these disciplines and the locus of research activity really being centered elsewhere on campus can sometimes leave humanities and social sciences researchers feeling like they're a little bit left out. Next slide. Okay, so that's research at NC State. If we change course here a little bit and talk about the Research Facilitation Service, next slide. Apologies in advance to those of you who have heard our director, Susan Ivey, talk about the RFS in previous CARC conversations, but a little bit of background. Like a lot of R1s, NC State offers a wide variety of computing and data services that are distributed and sometimes unevenly throughout campus. So our Office of Information Technology supports a centralized high-performance computing cluster and research storage service. In addition to which, there's this just wide array of other units across OIT, the libraries, our new Data Science Academy, department and college level IT units, and core facilities who all in some way support our CD needs. Each of these service providers has different avenues of contact and disseminates information about services in different ways, which can make it really difficult for not only new, but also seasoned researchers to even just find help at all, let alone navigate the ecosystem of choice that's available to them. And of course, time spent finding the right infrastructure is time they're not spending on their research question, right? So in addition to which, college and departmental level IT need to know how to collaborate with central IT to support their faculty's research, computing, and data needs. And that can be really hard when the relevant expertise is so decentralized. Next slide. So in 2020, a planning team was charged with surveying existing services, identifying and prioritizing gaps, and then proposing a framework service model to support needs throughout all phases of a research project's lifecycle. And that group ultimately recommended the creation of the Research Facilitation Service, which was conceptualized as this kind of cross-functional team with a few specific aims, right? So providing a single point of contact for researchers with needs related to computationally or data-intensive research, being available to help with technical requirements analysis and make recommendations about technologies, connecting campus research, computing, and data service providers to one another to kind of break down some of those communication silos, helping researchers and research administration, right, to plan for cyber infrastructure, and then acting as a resource and a conduit for strategic input by documenting service gaps and then really working with administration to address those gaps. Next slide. So here we all are, as you can see from our smiling faces, we're pulling from both the libraries and OIT to staff the service. And Derek and I, along with our director, Susan, are situated in the libraries. Next slide. So I think sometimes people are a little bit surprised that the libraries have been so heavily involved in the creation and delivery of this service. And Justin wanted us to kind of talk about libraries and what libraries' role is in this. Research computing is a pretty new space for libraries, generally speaking, right? For NC State, I think it was a really very intentional decision that both acknowledges the expertise that the libraries are bringing to the table with regard to research data management, preservation, visualization, and a bunch of other data-related services. And it's leveraging our reputation on campus for customer service and our position as a really trusted partner, particularly for researchers who may have, let's say, a historically fraught or difficult relationship with campus IT. Libraries are natural connectors, right? Our entire service model revolves around linking users with resources and information that they need. And we're positioned as these kind of interdisciplinary or discipline agnostic organizations that can kind of meet the needs of a broad academic constituency. And then building on those things, the libraries can kind of act as a backdoor for researchers who might be intimidated by the idea of computational approaches to their research. So, you know, researchers in the humanities and the social sciences, by and large, understand and are accustomed to the libraries. They can wrap their brains around what we are and what we do, and we're approachable. So we're in a position to connect them with appropriate IT resources and staff to really help them get up and running with more technologically complex projects than they might be used to. Next slide. So who do we support on campus, right? So in order to be sure that we're able to scale the service appropriately and retain that really hard-won trust by not overpromising and under-delivering, we have embarked on this iterative college-by-college approach to rolling out the service. So after a pilot period with the College of Sciences that began in April of 2022, we extended to the College of Natural Resources in January of this year, and just this week, we rolled out to the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. You know, every college on campus is going to be unique with its structure, its faculty composition, and its RCD needs. And one of the other advantages to this iterative approach has been really being able to take the time to get to know and understand each college individually, which is a strategy that we think will be particularly valuable with CHAS when we eventually expand there. Next slide. Acknowledging that every college and discipline has unique RCD needs. We've also seen some really broadly common issues, right? So in 2020, NC State participated in a study with Ithaca SNR that looked at big data research across the university. And one of the findings of that report was that the challenges that are encountered in working with big data are largely consistent across disciplines. So researchers are going to run into issues moving around, processing and analyzing large quantities of data, whether those data are genomics files or video recordings of qualitative interviews. Even for fields that don't generally use computational approaches, data management is, or at least it should be, a concern. And I think we're only going to see interest in learning about data management approaches and best practices grow as the funding agencies start to respond to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy's 2022 memo on advancing public access to federally funded research, because that applies equally to the NIH and the NEH. And the tent is just going to get bigger, right? So at NC State and elsewhere, there's been this real emphasis on interdisciplinary research and scholarship, which I think is just going to pull people into more computational approaches. Next slide. So very briefly, some challenges that we have seen. Getting humanists and social scientists to think about their data as data, right? So my BA is in history. I know from personal experience, that's not how historians think or talk about primary sources generally. So there's the potential for a real culture change there. And then even when we've won the terminology war, many of these researchers are dealing with data that has some level of sensitivity to it that poses unique challenges around things like access, sharing, and retention. In fact, all of the CHAS affiliated researchers with whom we've spoken since we kicked off the RFS have had questions in this area. You know, are there resources on campus to help support de-identification? Do we have the appropriate infrastructure to work with HIPAA covered data? All those kinds of things. And then finally, and I think Derek might lightly touch on this with his comments, but you know, as a service provider that's based at least in part and largely through the libraries, as I've kind of hinted at, sometimes it can be difficult to get campus to take the libraries seriously as an accomplished technical partner, right? So we've really struggled a bit with our IT partners and have had to reiterate for them, you know, we have staff with expertise in software development and in research computing, and we can really contribute in a meaningful way to those conversations. And then I will let Derek take over.
So yes, my side of this is somewhat anecdotal. I recently switched from a group that was housed within the central IT unit within that university to one, as she mentioned, that's more of a collaborative one hosted by the libraries. But I just thought I'd comment on my own perspective of what changes I've seen switching from a more of an IT governed unit to one that is at least collaborative, if not primarily libraries housed. The biggest change I noticed, and this is mostly occurring through the onboarding process and just who I'm connected with as a member of the libraries, but there was a much greater emphasis on communication, collaboration, organization, and scoping of projects. Not only as like priorities that I think everyone considers important and wants to prioritize, but priorities that were given dedicated time and meetings and emphasis before tasks were even given to organize, strategically thinking about how organization is done. This might be partly connected to being a relatively new unit, but it's something that I heard echoed through a lot of libraries people, and I think it's something that libraries as a part of an institution that's like dedicated to organizing and distributing material has a natural tendency to like excel in. However, as Moira hinted to, there is a distinct separation from other research computing units that ends up sometimes as a library like technical support member feeling more like a collaborator than a member of some groups. It can slow collaboration slightly, and like communication can lag a bit as people focus on the priorities of their group, not on groups that they're collaborating with, which makes sense, but it's just it's a give and take of being members of libraries in the world of research computing. And finally, as noted, just while libraries may be better positioned to like be more approachable to people new to research computing, like members of humanities and social sciences, much of our facilitation requests, at least the ones that I've had to handle, have been primarily STEM. Which might be in part because of the colleges we rolled out to thus far, and just the nature of NC State. So I thought I'd touch on, just as an example, a case study of supporting social sciences that delved into the world of research computing. This occurred before my position at a previous university, but I think it's still relevant. We as a group were approached by a pair of researchers, one political scientist and one sociologist, studying gerrymandering, or just unfairly constructed districts that were intentionally manipulated to either be packed or cracked, as in excessively full or empty of a given demographic, with the overall goal being to cause the electoral majority to not match up with the population majority in a given area. This is like a systemic issue that's been studied for a while, and the predominant problem is identifying districts that are packed because people tend to cluster with others of a similar demographic, versus those that were intentionally built that way by lawmakers trying to retain power for a given group. So these scientists had developed a pretty novel statistical way of assessing the district relative to those like nearby it, how much it compares to its neighbors, which you would expect it would compare more to its neighbors if the district was fairly built. But the issue became statistically evaluating it, being able to compare it to a distribution of all potential district plans. And the main way to do this in that field was through this Monte Carlo Markov chain simulation, Markov chain Monte Carlo simulation that was built in Python, while these researchers had experience in theoretical statistics, R, and Stata. So they reached out to us as a potential source of collaboration to essentially replicate what they were already doing on a small scale in R, but in Python, and give them the data that they were looking for. They worked their best through the documentation that was available online, but the way the program was built, the natural output tossed out all the iteration data and just gave them summary statistics, and extracting those iteration data, and especially the districting plans that were created, which was like millions of plans to create the distribution, was just beyond their skill set that they had. So the whole process took about 2 to 3 months of around weekly meetings, so like a moderately long collaboration, where, as often is the case in research support, you meet, you find what they want, you deliver that, and upon delivery, it is discovered that there's additional pieces that they can have, which is awesome because research is moving forward, but it can make it difficult to find a cutoff. I think this is a thing that occurs often in research computing, like in the STEM world, but might be even more prevalent with humanities, as these just groups are less used to working with research computing tools and the language and that kind of thing. And so the challenge became when to cut off support, which sort of came around when it was to the point where we would be doing the research rather than supporting it. And so we had a meeting and we switched emphasis from building code to documenting and commenting out code in such a way that it could be handed off to a new collaborator. They were able to find a data master's student that was interested in collaborating with them. And after, I think, like a meeting and then a follow-up in a couple months, they were able to take it and run with it, and ended up making a pretty cool publication on redistricting. And they're working on a publicly available website. As our previous speaker mentioned, a lot of humanities and social sciences people are really focused on sharing with the public. And so they're working on a website where people can examine their own states and their districting plans and use it in potential litigations and that kind of thing. So as I mentioned, this is very anecdotal, but just some lessons that I thought I learned from this experience. One, as mentioned before, research computing might be disproportionately STEM focused, but it still occurs in the social sciences at the very least, especially those that examine anything that varies over space and time. Those kind of questions often lend themselves to research computing tools. But with people that are new to this world and new to those tools, the often acclaimed role of documentation and commenting becomes all that much more important. Being able to clearly understand what code is doing makes it a lot easier to get over that initial learning curve that comes with kicking up research computing to the powerhouse world of it. And as mentioned before, with underrepresented groups, when you find someone who's looking to get over that hill, putting in the time was super rewarding. The people who want to be the pioneers for their field and get into computational research, if they can get to the point where they're self-sustainable, often just kind of run with the ball. And so it was just really satisfying putting the time and seeing it go once I was done. And I think that was only possible by identifying a member, either a collaborator or the researcher itself, who you're going to hand it off to once support is done, and designing the code, the documentation, and the strategy around who you're handing it off to. That probably is smart to do from the beginning. We did it towards the end, but just as a thing to think about throughout the process. So with that, I'll turn it over to, I guess, general questions across the board. I don't know if you guys have a different question slide to go to, but this is the one I made.
That's perfect. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Moira and Derek, for the presentation. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but if folks wanted to, I guess I'm seeing one right now from Paula that's listed in the chat. Okay, that they're just pointing out a social science support website, so check out that. And if anybody had any specific questions they wanted to pipe in with.
Yeah, I'll second Paula's endorsement of IASIS. They're a great organization for social sciences research. And then, Justin, I'm looking in the call doc, and it looks like there's a question about are you connecting with your IRB's read data management and security? And I will just say for NC State and for the RFS, yes, absolutely. We have a direct line to the IRB director, and we pepper her with questions all of the time. We are considering potentially having one of us join the IRB committee to reviews applications. So very much connected with them.
I would add on the IRB side too, one, our Associate Dean for Research has been a long time IRB member. I actually think he's not now, but so he is our first line of always talking with him. And then we also ask all kinds of questions with the IRB, including times where we're told to go away because we're probably asking too many questions. So
Funny. I see there is a question from Maureen. You have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of questions. I put in there sort of what your budgeting model is. Have you kind of run into, like, we're sort of in the beginnings of this, trying to figure out what central IT does. Our group, Research Computing, is within the Office of the Vice President for Research, and it's sort of, they want to hang on to some stuff, and I don't know. I just wondered if you run into that sort of, does the library, does it like, does everything come out of the library's budget now, or do you have some other method for that? I'd just be curious as to how that works.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I am actually going to let our RFS director, who I believe is in the audience, chime in and give us a little bit of a better picture. As far as I understand it, the funding is sort of divided between the libraries and OIT, and I'll let Susan provide additional details.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Maura. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so we don't really have a budget to really speak of. We have the funding, the lines for our FTE that's currently on our team. And those are pretty much split. You know, OIT covers some of those from state funds, and then the libraries cover some as well. We are sort of also new. So we don't own any of the infrastructure that we're connecting to. So there's an HPC team, and it has its own model and all of that, and storage and things like that. So we're just people right now. But going forward, you know, we've thought a lot about like how we can maintain and grow. And so we were talking about models, cost models for that, you know, consulting, longer term consulting, if we were to charge, if we were to become more embedded in projects and things like that. But right now, all I can say is that our FTE are covered between libraries and OIT's funds.
Okay, thank you.
You know what, I think I would, to build on that, I would say that that's kind of what Scott, maybe you can talk more, but the networks that you need to build to kind of build that consensus, to also build the groups of those research teams, and that network allows you to then crowdsource the need, to then take that to leadership to show the scale and the resources that are there. So that's another benefit to kind of creating those informal networks, reaching out to them, learning what the need is, and looking for those commonalities. You know that, you know, Scott, talking about the sharing of the resources with your mesh group with central IT when it comes to identity management, that's an example of how you can find those things. And then also, we know the regulatory changes that are happening at the federal level are going to force a lot of groups to better organize around supporting some of the, it may be information security, it may sound like security, but in the end, it's going to be research facilitation and supporting those researchers.
Yeah, I mean, Justin, you kind of said a lot of it, partially because we work so closely together on lots of things. But I mean, I do think like on some of the stuff around, you know, providing data for federal grants, and you know, when that announcement came out last year, because of the deep relationships that we have, we were able to start to have very informal conversations about what can that look like, what needs to be where, months ahead of where we maybe would have had that sort of thing. And in fact, you know, MSU Commons, which is something we run here as a node of the Humanities Commons network, is a provider for that sort of data storage that may not have been thought about if we hadn't been having these networks of conversation around it.
Great. Is there any other questions?
I was typing out an answer, but I can talk faster than I can type.
Perfect.
So, Tobin, to your question about how we get connected with the IRB, I think that might have just been, in some cases, happenstance for us that we developed as close a relationship with the IRB director as we have. But we've been very intentional, broadly speaking, about surveying campus for folks who are involved in supporting research at the RCD level and otherwise. So talking to folks, not just in OIT, but in ORI as the Office of Research and Innovation as well, and going out and having sort of structured interviews with units to try to help establish those relationships. And then again, I think I've just bugged her enough that she at some point, she always says she loves her librarians too. So, you know, I think that's another piece of it, is that we've inherited NC State's close relationship with the or NC State Library's relationship with the close relationship with the IRB.
Tobin, it was the data storage finder for us at Michigan State. Once that was constructed, that was a tool that we handed to the IRB to direct researchers to find the proper storage location for the data controls that they needed on that, and they could recommend that to the researchers. So now at MSU, we have an IT person that sits on both the SERB and the BERB, the two different IRBs that we have. So they're there directing traffic.
And also to touch on Paula's, I'm talking a lot, so somebody please feel free to cut me off, to touch on Paula's comment about it being a bit challenging to help the IRB. Is that, Paula, is your point, is it's challenging to have the IRB understand the role of security, or?
It's everything. So each institution's IRB is unique to that institution, and they make their own interpretations of the federal law. But my challenge has typically been to have them recognize in social science or in humanities research, because typically they're not in that area, the kinds of issues with data security that need to be addressed. Right now, they're just saying, well, if they say they're going to do it securely, it's good enough. And that's not usually true.
Yeah.
So it's this, stop meddling, Paula, you're making it too complicated. And then my going, there's lots of things here that we need to address. Right. So the number of people who think that just changing names is suitable for anonymization is dramatically too much.
Yeah, I think the issue of handling sensitive data, especially as we continue to see further mandates from federal funders, is something that is going to be a problem for most campuses, right? At NC State, it's kind of interesting to me. It's a very, sort of hinted at this, but a lot of our funding comes from places like DoD and DOE. We're a very compliance-oriented institution, and so we've had this interesting problem of trying to get our Office of Research to understand that compliance is also now sharing, right? So there's an openness component to it, that it cuts both ways. It's both security and sharing. So it's an interesting multidimensional problem, right? I don't have any real answers. I just thought I would make that observation. And then, sorry, Henry also asked about the relationship among the library's central IT and the VPVC for the research office, and day-to-day collaboration. And I'm going to throw Susan out there again and say that she's got a better insight into sort of their day-to-day collaboration. But, you know, we have an oversight and advisory group that involves folks from across campus. And I think that you know, Susan as director and her OIT co-lead meet regularly with, and by regularly, I mean, what is it, once a quarter, with the head of the libraries, the CIO, and the, gosh, what is Mladen's title? I'm sorry, my brain is dying. I'm going to let Susan just continue the rest of the answer to this question.
Yeah, I can hop in quickly on this. So for the research facilitation service that Moira and Derek were talking about, our team is of course split between research computing and OIT in the libraries, and our team itself collaborates daily. In terms of what the relationship at a higher level between the units looks like, for the RFS, our executive sponsors are our VP, our CIO, and a director of libraries. And then there's also other collaborations happening sort of outside of our group, but we get keyed into. Our Office of Research has a strong relationship with security and compliance folks in OIT. IRB gets brought in that way as well. So I think these collaborations, my understanding, I've been at NC State for a little over 5 years, and that in the last decade or so, these relationships, partnerships, collaborations are becoming increasingly better. And we're starting to work more regularly together to support research. And Henry, I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions you might have.
Thanks, Susan.
Well, that kind of follows nicely into how Scott let us off with that quote, you know, about this takes time, it takes collaboration, and you need to just keep working on these relationships. So, you know, if there's not any other questions, something, you know, I think I'll go ahead and just maybe do the announcements and close out the call and give everybody time to get to their next meeting. I really appreciate everybody helping with this call. It was a great conversation, and let's keep communicating. And thanks to the steering committee and Tobin for helping with the organization. And with that, I'll go ahead and just point out that next week in Minneapolis is Internet's 2 Technology Exchange. I'm going to be at that. If anybody else is there, look me up. Within CARC, we have 2 more calls next week. We have the Emergence Centers call on the 20th at noon Eastern, and then we have the systems facing call on the 21st, the beginning of fall. I think that's the first day of fall, the 22nd. And then the researcher facing this call next month, we're going to be talking about light sail for research in the AWS service. I see that EDUCAUSE is going to be taking place on October 9th in Chicago. Hopefully folks are going to that. I know that my boss is going to be going to the NSF Cybersecurity Summit for Trusted CI. That's taking place at Berkeley at the end of October. And, you know, with that, those are the announcements that I have. And again, thank everybody. Thank you for attending today, and good luck with the rest of your day and the week.